Hi, I'm Vince and welcome to my Vince Unlimited YouTube channel and welcome to a Vince Unlimited technology production. In this video I'm going to talk about my first ever camera, which I had for a birthday present new in the 1970s. Then I'll go on to show you some of the examples of the photographs I took over the years whilst analysing their quality. The camera was a basic Kodak Instamatic. I've no record of the actual model number, but upon image searching the internet I figured it was probably a Kodak Instamatic 133, which looked like this. The 133 model was very popular at the time and the look seemed very familiar to the boxed one I received. I recall it was made of a thin metal body, featherweight light to hold, with much black plastic on show, attempting to recreate a leathery effect but failing to feel anything other than cheap moulded plastic. Had to be gripped with two hands to take a photo because of its weight, but it was simpler to operate with virtually no settings as seen in this annotated drawing. It included a tacky bent metal shutter release button on the top, which needed far too much force to use, coupled to a noisy mechanical clunk with inevitable camera shake. The virtually fully automatic function of the camera was its whole point. As a result, it would never tax my skills or teach a newcomer about the dark art of film photography. It basically lacked most creative possibilities. The only decision to make when shooting involved making one of just two choice settings on the twist action of the lens, depending on whether the shoot was outside, in sunlight or anywhere else. You can see here the little pictograms showing either a full-on sunshine mode or alternatively a muddied sun or flashbulb setting. This simplicity did allow the novice camera operator to concentrate on composition. However, the lens offered no zoom facility. Composure involved moving towards or away from any given subject. Also, as it did not have a direct view SLR, single lens reflex function, it suffered from a terrible case of parallax. This is not a disease, just a term to describe the problem that whenever you got too close, the captured image was not really representative of the perspective seen through the edge-mounted viewfinder. This caused many early photographs to look offset. A Flashcube connection was available for night shots, upon which one could mount an optional four-way flashlight as pictured here. However, this destructive flash photography method was so expensive and yielded such poor and uncontrollable results that I rarely used this function. At the time, lining up film roll into a camera was a complex process, which I shall cover in greater detail in another, currently yet to be made video. Please subscribe to keep abreast of that development. The Instamatic range used a simpler snap-in 126 film cartridge system, as shown in this drawing I made. This meant loading film stock was a simple case of opening the back, lifting up the winding handle, taking out any current cartridge, and then dropping in a new one before securing down the winding wheel. Then wind the film on once to start, then a couple more turns before embarking on the first shot. Finally, after either just 12 or the more expensive 20 odd shots, the completed cartridge was removed and posted off to a developing house to be eventually returned after the obligatory wait of a couple of weeks for film processing. The excitedly anticipated return envelope contained a set of negative strips plus some square printed photos with white borders. Or alternatively, a set of slides could be requested. These were individual small square plastic framed, fully developed film images which could be projected onto a wall or screen in a darkened living room using a mains operated slide projector in a pathetic attempt to pretend you and the watching hordes of family members were at a cinema. All at great expense, even excluding the projector and its failure sensitive lamps. This expensive process meant the photographs was considered as semi-precious objects to the financially repressed, so as a result shots were limited in number and carefully considered. It was common to put the camera away with a carefully limited, half-used film cartridge, only to get it out again several weeks or even months later. Therefore, you had to have a system of remembering to wind on to the next film image after shooting, to safely secure the picture just taken, only to wind it on again before using the camera weeks later in case you hadn't done the same when you last used it. The film selector wheel mechanism was designed to prevent double images being taken. The process was to gently rotate the wheel arm until a click was felt, which released the shutter lock in readiness for the next shot. Then another mini half wind or two until a clunk was heard to signify you had correctly aligned the next image. At this point, the inbuilt film counter on the cassette, as shown here, advanced the frame counter by 1, as seen through the small rear window of the camera back, providing it hadn't misted over, which it inevitably had. With such a design, using a careful rolling of the wheel, you could engage the click in readiness to reshoot without actually moving the film on, meaning a multiple exposed photograph or 2 or more separate images. This occurred to me first by accident when I got a photo of both my siblings superimposed onto an image of me. I am in the centre with a white top and blue jeans. My sister Dawn is in the foreground. My brother Mark is stood crossed-armed in the background. These were originally planned and taken as individual images by a couple of hand-fisted camera operators, overcompensate to ensure the valuable film was only advanced just 1 frame each time, but actually getting it wrong. Handily, the virtually unchanged background seems to have been mainly dominated by a single image, so assists in the illusion. Naturally, having seen the result, I tried to reproduce this technique some while later, this time in a creative way in an attempt to get a picture of my sister fleeing an enormous guinea pig. This would be achieved by taking a full-length shot of my sister running scared, then superimposing a close-up of my perfectly normal-sized pet, Squeaky, a guinea pig, here seen scurrying around our family garden in black and white. He was actually black and white in real life, so you don't miss out with this genuine black and white shot taken by the Instamatic, which demonstrates how clear and precise monotone photography had become, if not very colourful. You'll see the monster guinea pig picture didn't really work as well as I'd hoped. Composition did actually work, but the exposure between the 2 frames was mismatched, and the pet would not be obvious without explanation, and looked like smudge. So in this version, I've drawn over Squeaky in more detail to show what I was hoping to achieve. And no doubt, had I done so, you would now be watching the video of a famous movie giant creator. Possibly. Another issue with film roll photography was that any image taken wasn't seen instantaneously, so immediate correction, editing wasn't possible. It was sometimes only after several months that you may receive back your efforts, with the inevitable many prints of dubious quality. Exposure issues, irregular framing, and errant fingers getting in the shot were commonplace in those days. But how did it actually perform? I've already shown just a couple of samples, but now I'll present a selection of shots taken with the camera of various subjects to show how it fared. Note that the following photographs were either captured by rephotographing the photo prints using my Apple iPhone, which was a 4S model at the time, or digitally scanned from slide originals using this VHO slide conversion device. All this was done around December 2011 and January 2012. Some cropping was carried out to remove extraneous parallax wastage and or to zoom into the subject detail when it was particularly distant. But no specific digital enhancements such as colour, brightness or exposure correction were carried out, unless the photographs were really poor. But many would have just had the simple one-press auto adjust button deployed to lazily allow a degree of automatic correction by my modern devices. First up, a few aviation photos taken in Air Show, probably Farnborough Air Show. You will see that in bright light, taking shots of the ground-based planes such as the C-130 Hercules provided reasonably good results, and you can clearly make out the complex reflections in the nose dome. The colour and associated punch in this shot of a Fairey Swordfish biplane with a hopefully unarmed underslung torpedo is particularly pleasing, even if the square photo format cut short its tail. And here the Kodak simple lens and fixed focusing cope well with the depth of field required for this near frontal view of the pencil-thin Lockheed F104 Starfighter. When it came to getting the aerial shots, the lack of zoom showed, and images such as this high-flying red arrows formation showed little of their bright red polished colour or clarity. Also, it didn't help that I had to crop into tiny parts of the sky even to capture large planes passing over, such as this big Delta Wing Avro Vulcan, but at least you can easily make out the open bomb bay doors. There's more detail in this Grumman F14-A Tomcat with his variable geometry wings set at the 20-degree angle, but the image has been overexposed to the point I couldn't fully correct it digitally with the tools I had at my disposal. Overexposure wasn't a problem with this flying view of the Hercules that I just showed parked on the ground earlier, Also note that I had no controls to pre-select a shutter speed to blur the propellers in order to create an illusion of movement. The Avro Lancaster shown here flew both slower and closer to me, so I was able to capture a clearer shot. Although you do not have to look too carefully to see it still lacks detail. Similar speed and closeness was also a factor in capturing this group of Fiat Aviazione G91 jets of the Italian Air Force taken off, and you can see that by me panning horizontally with them, the camera did slightly blur the background. Finally, the clearest in-flight image I managed to capture that day was of this US Navy LTV Corsair, and even zoom cropped it stands up reasonably well, albeit a bit smudgy, and certainly lacking the raucous noise when it took off. Moving on to landscapes, and the problem becomes scale. For instance, this shot of the Armada Memorial in Plymouth does not stand up to zooming in without blurring, making it unwatchable to focus into the figurine at the top. This second shot from the city of the Drake statue is rendered underexposed, so lacks detail, although in fairness the camera has managed to get some detail from the foreground, for example the stone and marble plinth, the statue itself, the background and even the partially clouded blue sky. Dark nature shots such as this massive rhubarb type plant produced a poor image with little clear detail and may be actually quite punchy with better lenses, more granular control and film stock. Even with reasonable daylight conditions, this French landscape looks colourless and flat, mainly because of the poor winter lighting. It was ski season. However, zoom in and you can see the cable car, if not its whole cable line. The final landscape image I show is my deliberate attempt to use the camera's limitation to create a silhouette on a bright day. This willow tree grew close to our house and the lack of exposure control actually helped me create the image I sought. Now on to one of my favourite subjects, particularly when I became a late teenager: bikes. I used the camera to capture images of my brother's shiny new moped he had in 1975. With stage shots got pretty acceptable results, as shown here in the garden on a sunny November day. This next shot shows my brother Mark at the helm and can be zoomed in to see the details reasonably well on both the bike and the rider, even capturing a fair amount of detail in the background foliage. This next shot of the handlebars comes from an oversaturated slide and as a result loses detail in the dials, to the point you can't read the mileage, plus it makes the tank sticker unclear. And this engine close-up shot appears more artistic than factual, with most of the shadow detail being lost, particularly around the exhaust exit. This Benelli 252C was at the time, and still is, a rare bike, so this photo of a new bike composed against an untidy building plot could be of historic value, and thankfully here the fixed camera settings were able to capture the bike in slightly better focus than the background. This uncontrollable focusing didn't work so well on this group of trail bikes, as the edges of the blue Yamaha DT400 merges into the Kawasaki KE175 on the left and the other black bike behind, leaving an overall flat image. And the camera didn't always do well in perfect sunny outdoor lighting, as can be seen here in this photo of my Honda CB200. Whole image colours are completely faded with an overall hue I could not remove, and when zoomed in the image is highly noisy. The effect was the same when I took a later shot of the same bike several months later, and I suspect these shots may have been the result of me opening the camera back at some time, having forgotten I still had a film in it with the inevitable overexposure of the entire film stock. Or possibly the issues are just due to film degradation over time. This wasn't the case with the final shot of my Honda, here shown with my father assisting in securing my two spare helmets onto my bike. A clear day and a clear if flat image. And if you want to know why I had two helmets as luggage, you will have to subscribe to my channel, because soon I should be filming a video telling the story of this bike. Next up, a couple of other varied vehicles, and I start with this Ferrari Dino 246 GT in a lovely shade of 70s brown, captured in a shady French street close to where I took a picture of the cable car. Here the camera had to cope with the car parked in the shade despite much of the background being lit up. It doesn't fare that well. You can see what the image is all about, but look closely and focus is poor and you can't really tell if the French use front number plates in the dark mess at the front. However, this Tiger tank in Bovington Museum is much clearer, despite being inside a gloomy building. The tough metallic finish is as striking as the gun barrel pointed at the subject. I do wonder though whether the little white plaque was really devoid of information as apparently seen. Next up, a few miscellaneous shots. This zebra, for instance, a very competent photo with the distinct stripes as clear as a barcode, so the camera and film didn't suffer from the blur and this sort of contrast can trigger in some lenses. However, the grass looks pretty faded and lacks the detail shown in the animal. This bright shot of my brother and I testing a tent erection in midsummer is also well rendered. I recall that tent in the clothes we wore, and the colours are spot on, and unlike the zebra, our grass is a bright green showing some film stock could produce realistic colours in good conditions. And to finish off, I'll show how the camera handled people's faces. The first shows my mother in a sunny outdoor setting next to a group of tulips. Here the tulips appear clearer than my mum's face due to the unusual issue of people's hair shading their faces. No automatic facial recognition in those days. Next is my friend Mark, who was about to be consumed by an extinct large predator. But his real problem is the poor coloration. Once more I think this is due to an inadvertent camera back opening episode, or possibly old film. However, detail is still present as shown in his t-shirt logo, and focal length is good. Similarly for this picture of Mark cooking up some food. The same coloration hue is present, but you can clearly see how the focal length has handled the foreground Honda as well as Mark centrally and his own bike in the background. The same image problems occur in this photo of my friend Jackie. Again, sharpness is lacking, although different whites of her t-shirt, blouse, collar, jumper and jeans are all distinct, if a bit bluish in colour, maybe suggesting the only camera setting I had of daylight or overcast stroke indoors was incorrectly selected. The outside settings for this image of my friend Susan do seem to be correctly chosen, and the colour of her t-shirt and jumper is rendered very brightly, perhaps overly so at the expense of the background sky. Again, some facial shadow cast is seen, particularly around her eyes, and the background tree appears to be a two-dimensional cutout. Finally, an indoor portrait of my sister Dawn on her birthday, shot using a flash, and you can immediately see that it is a mess. The flash in the darkened room plus contrasting candlelight has caused complete confusion, with the camera opting for a long shutter opening to compensate, causing motion blur as it was not tripod mounted. There's some artistic quality, but not enough to compensate for the overexposed face and cake. And the accidental lens halo effect caused by the ring of candles is too offset to add value. I hope you enjoyed seeing these examples and my assessment of them. And if you have any thoughts on any of these shots, why not type a comment below? I'd appreciate your input and your own thoughts on your first camera. However, in time, the days of having an effective child's camera ended as I finally acquired a semi-serious replacement. You'll have to subscribe to automatically be presented with the next video about my cameras and what they could produce. Thanks for watching, for liking this video and for subscribing as well. For information, this video was digitally captured in 4K at 60 frames per second on an Apple iPhone 14 Pro, then uploaded for editing iMovie on an iPad Air 4th generation, with the titles created in the Keynote app. All the photographs shown are by me, and so copyright lies just here. The illustrations of the camera and film stock were drawn by me using the Sketchbook app and my Apple Pencil 2, because my old Kodak Instamatic was never pointed at the mirror to capture itself, and is now long gone. Also used the pencil to do the work on the guinea pig photo, but this time in the Pixelmator app. This has been a Vince Unlimited Technology production, a film by Vince 2023. See you all again soon.